Stop scrolling for just a second. Have you ever felt like you were shouting into a void? Like the world is moving too fast, but you're stuck in the mud, staring at a ceiling at 3 a.m., wondering if anyone actually hears you. 3,000 years ago, a man named David sat in a dark cave, a fugitive in his own land, feeling the exact same weight. He didn't write a religious textbook, he wrote a diary. A raw, unfiltered, and sometimes terrifyingly honest record of what it's like to hit rock bottom and still look for the stars. Today, we aren't just reading the Psalms. We are stepping into the survival guide of the human soul. Why do these 41 chapters still echo in the hearts of millions today? What did a shepherd king find in the darkness that we are missing in our loud, modern world? Let's find out. This is the journey from the pit to the rock, the gateway to the soul, the two paths and the promised king. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine you are standing at a crossroads. Behind you is the noise of a modern world that never sleeps. The notifications, the deadlines, the constant pressure to be more, do more, and have more. But ahead of you lies a different path. It's an ancient trail, worn smooth by the feet of shepherds, kings, and poets who lived 3,000 years ago. This is the Book of Psalms. In the American tradition of storytelling, we love a good comeback story. We love the underdog, the person who finds light in the middle of a dark forest. Well, the Psalms are the original soundtrack for that journey. They are the unfiltered, raw, and sometimes messy diary entries of the human soul. They aren't just religious poems, they are a mirror. When you read them, you don't just see God, you see yourself. Before we dive into the struggles and the triumphs of David, we have to pass through the grand entrance. The first two Psalms act like the pillars of a great temple. They set the stage for everything else we are about to hear. The journey begins not with a command, but with a promise of happiness. Blessed is the man, the poet whispers. In our modern English, blessed can feel like a dusty religious word. But in the original heart of this poem, it's an exclamation of envy. It means, oh, how incredibly happy is the one who lives like this. Picture two very different things. First, imagine a massive ancient oak tree. Its bark is thick, its branches are heavy with green leaves, and its roots reach deep into a cool underground stream. Even when the summer sun is scorching the earth and the grass around it turns brown and brittle, this tree stays vibrant. It doesn't worry, it just grows. This is the person who loves the truth, who meditates on the ancient wisdom of the Creator day and night. Then, look at the ground. See that dry, weightless dust? That's the chaff, the outer shell of grain, that is so useless that even a light breeze blows it away into nothingness. The poet tells us that life is a choice between being that rooted tree or that drifting dust. One has a destination, the other is just blowing in the wind. But as soon as we finish looking at the individual life, the camera zooms out. The music shifts from a quiet flute to a thundering orchestra. In Psalm 2, we see the world stage. We see the nations in an uproar. If you've ever looked at the news and felt like the world is spiraling out of control, like the powers that be are plotting and raging in a frantic quest for control, then Psalm 2 is for you. It asks a blunt question: why do the nations rage? The kings of the earth gather. They talk big. They want to break free from any authority but their own. But then the poet gives us a perspective that changes everything. He takes us up into the heavens, where the Almighty looks down. And what does God do? He doesn't tremble. He doesn't panic. He laughs. It's not a laugh of cruelty, but a laugh of absolute confidence. While the world is shouting and plotting, God has already made his move. He says, I have set my king on Zion. He points to a chosen one, a son, an anointed king who will hold the scepter. This is the great tension of the human experience. The quiet, personal struggle to stay rooted like a tree, and the massive, global reality that a higher king is in control. The gateway ends with a warning to the rulers of the earth, and a warm invitation to us. Kiss the Son, take refuge in him, because at the end of the day, there are only two paths. One leads to the wind, and the other leads to the king. As we move forward into the heart of David's life, keep that tree in your mind, because the storms are about to hit. Cries from the shadows, faith in the wilderness. If the first 2 Psalms were the grand architecture of the temple, the next 12 chapters are the raw, grit, and dirt reality of living outside its walls. We move from the theoretical 2 paths into the actual footsteps of a man named David, a man who was a king, yes, but also a fugitive, a father, and a soul, often pushed to the very edge of breaking. Think of this section as the midnight sessions. This is where the music gets darker, the lyrics more desperate, but the hope more visceral. For anyone who has ever felt betrayed or stared at the ceiling at 3 a.m., wondering if God has forgotten their address, these chapters are your anthem. We start in the middle of a nightmare. Psalm 3 wasn't written from a palace balcony. It was written while David was fleeing for his life from his own son, Absalom. Can you imagine that heartbreak? The boy you raised, the one you loved, is now leading a coup to take your throne and your life. David looks around and sees thousands of enemies. He hears their whispers. God won't help him now. He's finished. But David does something revolutionary. In the middle of the chase, in the middle of the fear, he says, "But you, O Lord, are a shield around me." He doesn't just say God is at the shield. He says God is the shield. And then comes the most human line in the whole book. "I lay down and slept. I woke again, for the Lord sustained me." In a world obsessed with productivity and security, David shows us that the ultimate act of faith isn't a mountain-moving miracle. It's the ability to fall asleep when your world is falling apart. It's saying, "God, I can't handle this tonight, so I'm going to rest while you watch the door." As we move through Psalms 4, 5, and 7, the tone is one of vulnerable trust. David is pleading for justice. He's tired of the lies. He's tired of people loving vanity and seeking after falsehood. He's asking God to be the judge because he knows his own hands are tied. But then, just when the shadows seem too long, we hit Psalm 8. If you've ever stood in the middle of the Grand Canyon or looked up at the stars from a dark Montana sky, you have felt Psalm 8. It's a sudden shift from the me to the universe. David looks up at the moon and the stars, the work of God's fingers, and he feels that universal human ache. What is man that you are mindful of him? In a cosmos so vast, so ancient, and so terrifyingly large, why does the creator of the galaxies care about a shepherd boy running from his problems? The answer is breathtaking. God didn't just make us, he crowned us, he gave us dignity, he made us a little lower than the heavenly beings. In the American spirit, we value the individual, the self-made person. But Psalm 8 tells us our value doesn't come from what we make of ourselves. It comes from who made us and whose image we carry. It's a reminder that even when we feel like a speck of dust, we are a speck of dust that the King of the universe is obsessed with. But the relief of the starlight doesn't last forever. In Psalms 9 and 10, we crash back down to the reality of an unfair world. These are the social justice psalms of the ancient world. David, or the poet, think it those who oppress the poor, think they are untouchable, who say in their hearts, God has forgotten, he hides his face. Have you ever felt that? That burning anger when you see someone get away with cruelty? Psalm 10 is an honest, gut-wrenching cry. Why, O Lord, do you stand far off? Why do you hide yourself in times of trouble? It's okay to ask that. The Bible gives us permission to be frustrated with God's timing. But notice where the poem ends. It ends with a refusal to give up on the idea that the Lord is king forever. Even when the villains seem to be winning the short game, the poet bets his life on the long game of God's justice. As we reach the end of this section, Psalms 12, 13, and 14, the atmosphere becomes one of isolation. Psalm 12 laments a world where everyone lies to his neighbor and vileness is exalted. It's a world of silver tongues and fake promises. In contrast, the words of the Lord are described as pure silver, refined 7 times. In a culture of alternative truths and social media noise, this resonates. We are starving for something solid, something that doesn't change with the wind. Then comes the quintessential SOS of the Bible, Psalm 13. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? It's a short, 4-verse spiral into despair that suddenly, miraculously, turns into a song. But I have trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. It's the but that changes everything. Finally, Psalm 14 brings us full circle back to the gateway. It talks about the fool, the person who says in his heart, there is no God. Not because he has all the scientific evidence, but because he wants to live as if there are no consequences. David looks out at a corrupt generation and sighs. He longs for the day when salvation for Israel comes out of Zion. This whole section, these cries from the shadows, tells us one thing: God is not afraid of your darkness. He doesn't need you to be together or polite. He wants the fugitive David. He wants the questioning David. He wants the David who is too tired to pray anything but. How long? Because it's in the wilderness, far away from the comfort of the palace, that we find out if the shield is real. And as David discovers, it is. The morning always comes, the sun always rises, and the king is still on the throne. But before we get back to the palace, we have to learn what it means to be a citizen of the heavens. Glory in the heights, peace in the valley. Welcome back to the trail. If the last few chapters felt like a frantic run through the woods, clutching a shield while arrows whistled past, this next stretch is where the landscape opens up. We are moving from the panic of the fugitive to the perspective of the priest and the astronomer. In this section, encompassing Psalms 15 through 24, we find the absolute heart of the first book of Psalms. This is where David stops, looking at his enemies for a moment, and starts looking at the character of the God he serves and the world he has built. It begins with a question that feels very modern, very much like something we'd ask ourselves in a quiet moment of reflection. Lord, who may dwell in your sacred tent? In other words, what does it take to actually be close to the divine? In a world of performative goodness and social media filters, Psalm 15 hits like a splash of cold water. It's a checklist of integrity. It's about the person who keeps their word even when it hurts, who doesn't slander, and who treats their neighbor with genuine honor. It tells us that access to the presence of God isn't about rituals, it's about the heart you bring into the room. But David knows he isn't perfect, so he quickly shifts to his need for a refuge. In Psalm 16, he makes a declaration that has anchored millions of people throughout history. The lines have fallen to me in pleasant places. Think about that for a second. Even when life is hard, David looks at his relationship with the Creator and says, my inheritance is beautiful. He finds a security that isn't based on his bank account or his popularity, but on the fact that his soul will not be abandoned to the grave. Then we hit the epic, cinematic masterpiece that is Psalm 18. If this video were a movie, this would be the high-budget action sequence. David describes God's intervention as a cosmic storm. He pictures the earth shaking, the mountains trembling, and God parting the heavens to come down. Imagine God flying on the wings of the wind, wrapped in thick darkness and hailstones, reaching down into the deep waters to pull a drowning man out. It's a powerful, visceral image of a God who doesn't just watch from a distance, but rolls up his sleeves and dives into the chaos to save one solitary soul. He brought me out into a spacious place, David says, gasping for air. He rescued me because he delighted in me. From the thunder of Psalm 18, we move into the quiet, breathtaking awe of Psalm 19. If you've ever stood under a canopy of stars in the middle of a desert and felt that overwhelming sense that there has to be something more, this is your psalm. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. David realizes that there are two books God has written. The first is the book of nature, the sun that runs its circuit like a champion, the silent speech of the stars that reaches the ends of the earth. But the second book is even more intimate, the law, the Word. He describes it as sweeter than honey and purer than gold. It's the light that warns us and the truth that revives us. It's the perfect balance of the massive universe and the personal heart. But as any American who has chased a dream knows, life isn't always a starry night. Sometimes it's a battlefield. Psalms 20 and 21 are the pre-game and post-game prayers for a king going to war. It's a reminder that victory doesn't come from chariots and horses, the technology and weapons of the day, but from the name of the Lord. And then we arrive at the valley. Psalm 22 is one of the most haunting and significant poems ever written. It begins with a cry that would later echo from a Roman cross, centuries later. My God, why have you forsaken me? This isn't a polite prayer. This is the sound of a soul being crushed. David describes himself as a worm, not a man scorned, mocked, his bones out of joint, his heart melting like wax. It's a graphic description of agony. And yet, in the middle of this abandonment, the poem turns. It transforms from a cry of pain into a vision of global hope. David predicts a day when all the ends of the earth will remember and turn to the Lord. It's the ultimate darkest before the dawn story. And after the darkness of the 22nd, we walk straight into the most famous poem in human history, Psalm 23. Even if you've never stepped foot in a church, you know these words. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. But read it again through David's eyes. A shepherd's life isn't a postcard. It's dirty, dangerous, and exhausting. David tells us that even when we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, we don't have to fear. Why? Because the shepherd is there. He doesn't take us around the valley. He walks us through it. And the most provocative image of all, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Imagine sitting down to a 5-course meal, perfectly calm, while your greatest fears and critics are standing just a few feet away, unable to touch you. That is the kind of peace this book offers. Finally, this section closes with Psalm 24, the grand entrance. We've gone from the individual heart in Psalm 15 to the stars in Psalm 19 to the valley in Psalm 23. Now, we are back at the gates of the city of God. The King of Glory is coming home. Lift up your heads, you gates. Be lifted up, you ancient doors. Who is this King of Glory? He is the one who was with David in the cave, the one who reached into the deep waters, and the one who walked him through the valley. As we move into the next part of our journey, we carry this confidence with us. The world belongs to him, and so do we. But as we're about to see, even those who know the shepherd still have to deal with the heavy weight of their own mistakes, the weight of the heart. Mercy in the depths. We have walked through the green pastures of the 23rd Psalm and stood before the towering gates of the 24th. But now, the terrain shifts again. We're moving into a section that feels a bit more like a long, late-night conversation over a cup of coffee. This is where the weight of life, the mistakes we've made, the secrets we carry, and the relentless pressure of time comes to the surface. In Psalms 25 through 33, David teaches us how to breathe when the atmosphere of life feels heavy. If you've ever been on a long road trip and realized you were completely lost, you know the feeling of Psalm 25. David isn't just asking for directions, he's asking for a transformation. Show me your ways, Lord. Teach me your paths. It's a humble prayer of a man who has realized his own compass is broken. He asks God to remember his mercy, but then he adds something incredibly relatable. Do not remember the sins of my youth. We all have those moments we wish we could erase, the impulsive decisions, the words we can't take back. David shows us that the way forward isn't by pretending those things didn't happen, but by throwing ourselves on the steadfast love of a God who is bigger than our past. As we move into Psalm 27, we encounter one of the most defiant declarations of courage ever written. In America, we value grit and toughness, but David's courage is different. It's a borrowed courage. The Lord is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear? Picture a man surrounded by an army, with war rising against him. His heart doesn't skip a beat. Why? Because he has narrowed his life down to one thing, not 100 things, just one, to dwell in the presence of the Lord. He knows that the secret place is the only truly safe place in a world of shadows. But then the weather changes. We hit Psalm 2, and it's like a summer thunderstorm rolling across the plains. This is often called the Psalm of the Seven Thunders. David describes the voice of the Lord echoing over the waters, breaking the mighty cedars of Lebanon, and shaking the wilderness. It's a raw display of power. It's a reminder that the God we talk to in our quiet rooms is the same God who commands the lightning. Yet, how does this terrifying storm end? It ends with a whisper of peace. The Lord gives strength to his people. The Lord blesses his people with peace. The storm doesn't come to destroy us. It comes to remind us who is in charge, so we can finally stop trying to be in charge ourselves. From the thunder of the 29th, we fall into the deep, personal relief of Psalm 30. This is the song of someone who has stared death in the face and lived to tell about it. You turn my wailing into dancing, David sings. If you've ever recovered from a long illness or walked out of a season of deep depression, you know this feeling. The most famous line of this poem has become a lifeline for millions. Weeping may stay for the night, but rejoicing comes in the morning. It's a promise that the darkness has an expiration date. No matter how long the night feels, the sun is technically already on its way. Then we reach a crucial turning point in the soul's journey. Psalm 32. This is the second of the penitential psalms, and it is perhaps the most psychologically profound. David describes what happens when we try to hide our mistakes. He says his bones wasted away and his strength was dried up as by the heat of summer. We know that feeling, the physical weight of guilt, the exhaustion of keeping up appearances. But then comes the moment of honesty. I acknowledged my sin to you, and you forgave the guilt of my sin. The music here shifts from a heavy, minor key to a bright, soaring major key. The relief is palpable. David isn't just forgiven, he is hidden in God. He's no longer running from God, he's running to him. This leads us directly into the grand orchestral celebration of Psalm 33. This isn't just David's song anymore, it's a call for the whole world to join in. Sing joyfully to the Lord, you righteous. It is fitting for the upright to praise him. In this section, we've moved from the lost feeling of Psalm 25 to the found celebration of Psalm 33. We've seen that mercy isn't just about God letting us off the hook. It's about God pulling us out of the suffocating heat of our own secrets and placing us in the cool, refreshing wind of his grace. It's about the new song that gets put in our mouths when we realize that our life isn't a series of accidents, but a story being written by a sovereign creator. As we prepare for the final stretch of this first book, we carry this new song with us. We've learned to wait, we've learned to trust, and we've learned to confess. Now, it's time to see how this faith works when it's tested in the furnace of real-world betrayal and suffering. The Song of the Rescued. From the pit to the rock, we have reached the final stretch of our journey through the first major movement of the Psalms. If you've stuck with us this far, you've felt the pulse of a human life in all its messy, glorious complexity. We've seen the blessed tree of Psalm 1 and the King of Glory in Psalm 24. Now, as we navigate Psalms 34 through 41, the music reaches a crescendo. This is the grand finale of Book 1, and it is a masterclass in what it means to live with grit and grace. We start with a song born out of a moment of pure, desperate survival. Imagine David, once a hero, now a man so hunted that he has to pretend to be a madman in a foreign court just to stay alive. It's humiliating. It's rock bottom. But when he finally escapes, he doesn't write a song about how clever he was. He writes Psalm 34, a poem that has become a cornerstone of the American spiritual experience. I sought the Lord, and he answered me. He delivered me from all my fears. Then he gives us an invitation that is as much about the heart as it is about the senses. Taste and see that the Lord is good. In our culture, we are told to believe things or analyze things, but David tells us to experience God. Like a meal you have to eat for yourself, he says you can't just hear about grace, you have to taste it in the middle of your own struggle. He promises that the Lord is close to the brokenhearted. If your heart is in pieces today, Psalm 34 is the glue. As we move into the mid-30s, the tension rises. In Psalm 35, David is pleading for God to contend with those who contend with me. He's facing people who repay his good with evil. But then, in Psalm 36, he pivots. He looks away from the darkness of human nature and looks at the fountain of life. He describes God's love as reaching to the heavens and his faithfulness to the skies. It's a reminder that while people might fail us, there is a source of life that never runs dry. Then we hit the wisdom of Psalm 37. This is the deep breath of the Bible. If you've ever felt your blood boil because someone dishonest got the promotion you deserved, or because the bad guys seem to be winning the game of life, this psalm is your sedative. 4 times David tells us, "Do not fret." In the original language, fret means to burn or glow with anger. David says, don't burn yourself out watching the wicked. Instead, he gives us a 4-step rhythm for a peaceful life. Trust in the Lord, delight in the Lord, commit your way to the Lord, and finally the hardest part, rest in the Lord. Be still, because the meek will inherit the land. It's a radical countercultural idea that the way to win in the long run is through quiet trust, not frantic grasping. But the journey doesn't stay quiet for long. Psalms 38 and 39 pull us back into the raw reality of physical and emotional pain. In Psalm 38, David is suffering. His wounds stink and are corrupt. He's lonely. His friends stand afar off. He's feeling the weight of his own mistakes again. Then, in Psalm 39, he meditates on the brevity of life. He realizes that every human being, at their best, is but a vapor, a mist that disappears in the morning sun. It's a sobering thought, but it leads him to a profound conclusion. And now, Lord, what do I wait for? My hope is in you. When you realize how fragile life is, you stop putting your hope in fragile things. This leads us into one of the most cinematic moments in the entire collection. Psalm 40. Picture David standing at the bottom of a slimy pit, his feet sinking into the miry clay. He's stuck, he's dirty, he's exhausted. And then he says, I waited patiently for the Lord. And what happens? God reaches down, pulls him out of the mud, and sets his feet on a rock. He gives him a firm place to stand and puts a new song in his mouth. This isn't just a story about David. It's the story of every person who has ever been rescued from an addiction, a depression, or a cycle of failure. It's the transition from the mud of the past to the rock of the future. Finally, we arrive at Psalm 41, the closing chapter of the first book. It brings us back to the themes we started with, the importance of compassion for the poor and the reality of betrayal. David is sick, and even his close friend, someone he shared bread with, has turned against him. It's a bitter note to end on, you might think, but David doesn't end with the betrayal. He ends with the blessing. He knows that even if his friends leave him, the Lord will uphold him. And then, in the very last verse, the music swells for the final doxology. It's the signature that closes this first movement of the Psalms. Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, from everlasting to everlasting. Amen and amen. We've traveled from the quiet meditation of Psalm 1, through the shadows of caves, into the halls of palaces, down into the pits of despair, and finally onto the solid rock of praise. What we've learned in these 41 chapters is that there is no human emotion too dark for God to handle, and no pit so deep that his arm can't reach you. The story of the Psalms continues, but here, at the end of Book 1, we can take a breath. We've seen the shepherd, we've seen the king, and most importantly, we've seen that in the middle of a world that is often chaff blowing in the wind, we can be that tree planted by the water. Our roots are deep, our king is on the throne, and the song, the beautiful, messy, honest song of the soul, never truly ends. Aim and aim. We've traveled a long way today from the rooted tree of Psalm 1 to the new song of Psalm 40. Looking back at these first 41 chapters, here is my perspective. The book of Psalms is the only place in the world where you are allowed to be completely, brutally honest with the Creator. It teaches us that faith isn't about having all the answers or pretending to be okay. It's about the courage to cry out from the depths and the patience to wait for the rescue. David's life reminds us that even if your crown is caked in mud, you are still a child of the King. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. This journey through the Bible is one we take together, and your presence here truly matters. If these words brought a moment of peace to your day, please hit that like button. It helps these ancient truths reach more people who might be struggling right now. Subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss our next journey into the deep wisdom of the scriptures. And I want to hear from you. Which psalm or which specific verse resonated with you today? Did it meet you in your valley? Leave a comment below. Your insights help us improve and grow this community of seekers. Share this video with someone who needs to know they aren't alone in the pit. Until next time, keep seeking, keep trusting, and remember, your morning is on its way. God bless.